Savita, I'm going to invite my student Vidisha to do the formal introduction. Vidisha is doing her PhD in physics.
So maybe I'll be facing. Uh, okay, I'll be. Okay, okay.
Vidisha, I think you can face the same direction as you're just fine, just as you are. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
So I'm honored to introduce Dr. Savita Ayyar. Dr. Savita Ayyar studied biotechnology at AIMS New Delhi, and then she earned her PhD in life sciences from the University of Cambridge. She led research development at NCBS Bangalore for several years, and now running the Jacaranda Tree, if I'm pronouncing it correct, and an independent consultancy service aimed at supporting organizations with their research management needs. And her secret moniker is the grant whisperer, a reputation that she has garnered for her uncanny knack of turning good proposals into great ones. Over to you, Dr. Ayyar.
Thank you so much, Vidisha. My God, that puts a lot of pressure on me. So, well, firstly, a huge thanks to Devpriya and Ashoka University for inviting me to meet all of you, to interact with you today. So the next hour or two, we'll be discussing grant writing and more generally communicating in the areas of science and research. Yeah. So since Devpriya sort of set the talk title as the grant of your dreams, I'm going to start my presentation with a story that's based on dreams. So let's see if I can share my screen. And I hope everyone's able to see the screen.
Yes, absolutely.
All good. Thank you so much. Okay. So, yeah, this is the story. So the gentleman in the picture is Mendeleev, who was a very famous Russian scientist. And the story goes that he was trying to classify elements into some sort of a table. This was the precursor of what we now call the periodic table in chemistry. And so he had neatly organized various elements according to their different properties. And he was working on this, what was a puzzle at the time. And the story goes that he fell asleep and the solution appeared to him in his dreams. So when he woke up, he was able to organize the elements into the periodic table quite nicely, the elements that were known at that time. But what also turned out is that based on that kind of a formula, he predicted certain gaps and predicted that there would be new elements possibly yet to be discovered which would fit those gaps. And that's exactly what happened with the later elements which are discovered. And so this is a little story about the research process. The purpose of research is to create new knowledge, and we do that standing on the shoulders of giants on the basis of what is already known in the field. And also, our current research then identifies gaps, which obviously then somehow get filled with future research. And this periodic table that Mendeleev created was a visual way of depicting his findings. And you'll find that in science, in research, this act of communicating about your research is a fundamental aspect of research itself. I just wanted to share another visual sort of tool for communicating research, which I find really beautiful. These are botanical drawings. And there was a particular time where in Europe, there were a bunch of people who wanted to catalog information on plants from all across the world. So they commissioned artists to actually make these beautiful paintings of different parts of the plants, including their seeds, their fruit, flowers and leaves at different stages. And today we use these as botanical art because many of them are really beautiful, but they're also incredibly accurate and valuable records of the scientific process at the time. And here's another example of amazing visual art. This is Raymond Cajal's drawing of neurons. And again, this is a beautiful way of putting down on paper and therefore disseminating to others his knowledge about neurons and their properties. And now disseminating or communicating about research is not just visual. Of course, we know that there are oral presentations we make, there's the written word, there are so many different ways in which research is communicated. So I'd just like to just make this point that research builds on previous knowledge and is for the purpose of creating new knowledge, and sharing of ideas and dissemination of research outputs is integral to the research process. You might have conversations in your laboratories while you're doing experiments. That's sharing of ideas, and sharing of ideas in other ways as well. It could be through reports, through presentations. You might travel to a conference and share your work at a conference. And grant proposals also are part of this body of work, which is a way in which researchers can communicate research ideas and research findings to other colleagues. So just once again, the spoken and written word in research communications is really integral to building your careers in research. So I want to introduce a concept called the research life cycle. This is just a way of understanding the research process. If you look at the blue sector on the top right, the planning and design of experiments, that's sort of where it begins. And then you collect data, you create resources, analyze, sometimes in collaboration with other colleagues, evaluate the results, archive them in different ways, and then it goes into sharing, dissemination through so many mechanisms that are available to researchers today. And of course, then what this means is once this information is published, it can be reused by others in the field. And this is a very simple view of the research life cycle. And I'd just like to emphasize that research funding is critical for enabling all steps of this research life cycle. And that as researchers, we have to accept research funding and grant writing as part and parcel of our scientific journeys. So I just want to take a moment to look at this whole, matter of communicating about research. So there is a looking back or a retrospective view, which is, for example, in the form of reports, presentations, theses, publications, and all of that, which is an opportunity to reflect on the results that have been arrived at, what these mean, and what would you like to present to the peer group. Now, what is the target audience for any of these kinds of communications? It might be your PhD supervisors, you might have thesis committees, you might have other peers, for example, other researchers in the field who are doing similar work, who are interested in the results of your own work. Typically, this involves talking about the context, what I did, and what are the insights I got from any of this piece of work. There is another aspect which is going forward or looking forward, projecting into the future, and that's where grant applications, project proposals fall in that sort of forward-looking phase. Again, that involves communicating to funders, to review committees, other colleagues about, again, starting with the context, what has already been done in the field, what are the gaps in the field, and what do I propose to do, I or my team propose to do in future, address those gaps. And what happens is that if the grant is funded, if the program is successful, then of course it feeds back into the backward loop. So this is actually a cycle. I mentioned the research life cycle, and here we go. There's a communication life cycle around research. So it's important for us to just accept that both the retrospective and prospective communication tools are incredibly useful and important for research. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here now, maybe looking at this phrase called research funding. What does research funding mean? All of these experiments that need to be done in the laboratory, in the field, or computationally, they require funds. It might take the form of fellowships or for personal support. So if there's a PhD studentship that is enabling a student to actually carry out that piece of research, that is funding towards that student's fellowship. All research requires some kind of materials and consumables. For example, if you're doing next-gen sequencing, that's going to need all of the consumables for the sequencing. There's also equipment. Of course, a lot of contemporary, especially scientific research, requires heavy equipment, and all of this is made possible by research funding. Another category I've included here is travel to meetings, because you might want to go to a meeting in some other part of the world, present your own work, and hear about the work that's been done in other labs. So I'm going to take a bit of a pause. Depriya, if we can hand the mic around, I'd love to hear from our participants today and also those who are joining in on Zoom. Any other categories where they think that funding is required for some aspect of research? It doesn't have to be a perfect answer, so please just think about your experience and
Savita,
share.
this is, we
Yeah.
have
Am I audible?
Satyam. Yes,
Yeah.
Satyam, who's doing his PhD in environmental science.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
one more thing to consider is funding for publications. Sometimes the publication cost is pretty high and it's not
Yes.
possible from the personal funding to do that. So I think that's also something to consider on.
Absolutely, especially open access publications, they are very expensive. That's a very good point. Any other suggestions? And I'd love to hear what field of study you're from as well.
And even if you just wanted to share a little bit, that would be fine too, right, Savita?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And I think we have physics, chemistry, environmental science, and the biological sciences represented here, right? Computer science and math. So yeah,
Okay,
get the whole range.
awesome.
Anyone else?
I
Yes, sure,
remember
sure.
during my postdoc days, actually, some of us put together a seminar series because we wanted to invite certain speakers to come and give talks to our postdoc community. So we fundraised for that, because we wanted to give an honorarium to the speakers, pay for their travel costs and all of that. Any other thoughts on?
Often there's a contingencies b- budget head that kind of covers a bunch of other miscellaneous things like
Absolutely. Yeah.
temporarily hiring a contractor for a specific job, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, and stuff like that. So
Yeah, for that matter, actually recruiting staff. I mean, that's something that's not there on my slide. But many grants actually enable research assistants, project managers, etc., to be hired, and they're an integral part of the project.
Okay, I think there aren't any.
All right, we'll move on then. Thank you for that. So then we come to this question of who raises the research funding, because obviously it's a lot of work to actually successfully bid for funding. Now, I've got these concentric rings on the slide. You might be wondering what that is, but it's just to represent the fact that this could be from an individual researcher. For example, if it's a postdoctoral researcher, you're trying to raise funds, you're trying to raise your own fellowship, that could be an individual. It could be, for example, your supervisors raising funds for a project within the lab. Your supervisors could be raising funds, they could be working with other collaborators, maybe in India or overseas, and raising funds for collaborative projects. Or it could even be an institution that's raising. For example, at Ashoka, if you have so many different centers, maybe the institution, there's an institutional team that actually puts in the effort to raise funds for those centers, right? So there are different ways in which research funding is raised. I mean, the individuals who are involved, it could either be single researchers or sort of this larger and larger sort of team. Again, any thoughts? I mean, please feel free to interrupt. When I've got those thought bubbles on my slides, it means I'd love to hear from our attendees today. You can
Anything?
just put your hand up if you want to say anything. If not, we'll just move ahead. And you can always come back to these points later on. So there's plenty of room for discussion. And now this is the important question, who actually provides the research funding? Now, some of the funding could be intramural. For example, Ashoka University giving funds to Ashoka researchers. Now that's called intramural funding. But here I've got the logos of a whole bunch of external funders. These are legally separate entities. They are set up with the purpose of actually providing research funding. And so they have a specific mandate. Now, for example, ICAR funds all research pertaining to agriculture, right? So in that manner, each agency usually has a defined mandate and it funds for a specific purpose. And how do they do that? They do that through specific funding schemes. So they issue what are called funding calls, call for proposal, request for proposal. All of those are exactly the same thing. And that call sets out the details, the expectations of the funders of what it is that they're looking for, what it is that they're willing to fund, and what are the boundary conditions for those funding calls. So it's just important to understand this huge diversity of funders. And so as researchers, if you're hoping to apply to these organizations, then it requires some reading through the fine print and understanding their terms and conditions. And what is a grant application? Let me just put this definition out here so that we're all kind of agreed and we're on the same page about this. A grant application is a formal request for financial support. Now, in our context, it is for research, but it could also be for other purposes. For example, it could be for building a bridge. That's a completely different kind of grant application, but we will restrict ourselves to research funding. And now the grant application, as I just talked to you, it can be made from individual or institutional sources to an agency. And usually this is for a specific purpose. It's what's called the project. So we, rather than try and address all of the research problems in the world, we focus on some specific questions. And that is what is submitted to the agency as the request. There's a budget that's usually specified because that's the whole purpose of writing the grant application. And what are called boundary conditions, you might also hear them referred to as terms and conditions, compliances. These are some of the words that are used, but those have to be respected by the individual and the institution trying to raise funding. And now we come to the question of who manages the research funding. And I'm just setting these little questions out so that we have a shared understanding of these terms. Now, a lot of early career researchers assume that just because they're applying for funding, the funding agency will release the funds to them. It's not the case. There are very few agencies that release funds directly to individual researchers. Usually, funding agencies release money to their institutions. So we can just think of this in two ways. At the institution, the person who's the principal investigator, this is a person with the biggest intellectual contribution to the project, who's taking responsibility for all aspects of the project. The person who's putting the funding application in is the principal investigator. That person plays a very big role in managing the funding. The institutional administration are incredibly important, the accounts team, the HR team, and I know Ashoka has a research development office. So the RDO would definitely play an important role in administering the funding. And there are project managers and administrators, maybe they're part of the team or they're institutional. Similarly, this is mirrored at the funding agency because the funding agency will have their own administration, especially finance, and the project managers and administrators. So it actually, managing research funding is a complex activity that involves a lot of different parties. So while writing the research proposal is a little bit more centered on the PI, managing research funding definitely involves a lot more parties. Yeah. So I hope this video plays, but let's just.
I think health has been left a little bit in the discussion when we talk of climate change and climate change mitigations. My name is Dr. Faraja Chiwanga. I'm a medical doctor working in the.
I just thought I'd play this clip to give you a flavor of a project that has been funded by the Wellcome Trust.
And I'm also the executive secretary of Lead Foundation in Tanzania. More than 70% of the population, they have to work outdoors. Now, with this research, we are looking at whether putting trees in the cropland can help farmers alleviate the heat effect in their bodies. We have been working with the rural communities for almost 10 years now. Initially, we were only evaluating in terms of how many hectares we have regenerated, those kind of things. But one of the things that was clearly coming from the community was how they felt their environment was cool. And to me, if they can say they feel different, they feel healthier because they feel less sun, then I thought it is surely they are feeling something inside the bodies as well.
All right. So this is the first question is who is the principal investigator of this project? The answer is that's Faraya Chiwanga. She's a doctor based in Tanzania, and they've been working on this problem for many, many years. The research topic here is the impact of trees in reducing heat stress in human beings. And this is a smaller project that was funded by the Wellcome Trust. And I've just given this as an example of the individual, the topic, and the agency. And this is the kind of triad that you'll find whenever you're thinking about grant funding. So now I want to move to, I think, the core of what we are here to discuss today, and that's actually compiling a grant application package. So here I just wanted to say that there's a whole bunch of funding opportunities available. As I shared with you earlier, there are many, many funders who support research in India across different disciplines. But also, if you look at the schemes that they put out, then you might find schemes for personal support or recognition. These could be fellowships, where the PI gets a contribution towards their salary support. Some of these fellowships also include a research component over there. So there's the research grant and a salary support component. There are a whole bunch of funding schemes for networking, and this is crucial for especially early career researchers, well, actually researchers at all career stages. So there's funding for organizing meetings and workshops, funding for travel to conferences, also for what are called exchange visits. So for example, if this is a collaboration between Ashoka and a university in Germany, then the funding provides an opportunity for someone from Ashoka to visit the German university and their counterpart to come there from Germany to Ashoka. So those are what are called exchange visits. And so some funding agencies provide funding specifically for exchange visits. Collaborations, this is another very large piece of work. There are several funders who support international partnerships because that allows researchers from all across the world to leverage their strengths to come together and to address very, very interesting questions, which maybe they might not have done on their own within their home country. There are also multidisciplinary partnerships. For example, it might be a funding call that brings together academic researcher from, say, biology with a researcher from economics and other disciplines. So that, again, is a very, very different kind of a partnership. Multi-sector partnerships, again, there could be funding calls that support academic researchers to work together with clinicians, with engineers, or with patient advocacy groups to build new programs. So there are a whole bunch of collaborative funding instruments available from a lot of these funding agencies. And of course, research resources. So many of you may be aware of project support. So this is a discrete project, maybe for 3 years, that is supported in terms of materials and consumables, people to do the actual project, a bit of equipment, and so on. There are also grants which are specifically for supporting equipment and infrastructure. For example, if it's a new microscopy setup, maybe there's funding, enabling funding that's made this entire unit possible. And then zooming out to a very large scale here of what I've called center grants. These are very large projects which bring together a huge number of stakeholders. And again, there are certain agencies which fund these kinds of center grants for specific purpose. And at the other end of this are grants for innovation. So once the research has reached a stage where it is ready to start on its journey to market, then there are several grants that are available for that. Now, it can be quite daunting to go through all of these funding calls, and you might need a bit of help in understanding how to find the right funding opportunity that is most suitable for what you'd like to do. So I think for students at Ashoka, there's a wonderful opportunity. You can seek help from your RDO, and your RDO staff will be able to help you identify the right funding opportunity. And I also just wanted to point out that some of these are what are called rolling calls, which means that there are applications accepted throughout the year. But many of them are deadline driven, which means that once you've identified the right funding opportunity, there is a specific deadline. And so you need to work towards that deadline, which can be quite stressful, but that's how it works. And, we're here to discuss grant writing, but I just also wanted to point out that the grant application package is bigger than what is called the project narrative. So here I've just listed out some typical inclusions, but it really depends on the kind of grant that you're putting together. And so specifics might be a little bit different. It could be larger than this list, but you definitely expect to see a project narrative which actually spells out what is being proposed, the budget and the justification, what are the resources you need to do that piece of work, and why are those resources required, the series of all the applications and applicants and collaborators, because the track record is very important. Do you actually have the expertise to carry out any of this work? So that is something that the committees assess. You might definitely require letters of support from a whole bunch of people. We'll come to that in a bit. And there might be other supporting documents. So these are typically the kinds of inclusions in a grant application package. So as you can see, there are a lot of different things which need to be brought together within, oftentimes it's a very short span of time. It might be a month for you to bring everything together. So in all of this, I think defining the research question, this is really important. I'm sure that as PhD students, you found that in your own, graduate work as well. I'm sure you have a lot of discussions with your supervisors and your thesis committee advisors on what is the research question you need to be working on. And similarly, for a grant proposal, defining that research question is a really important step. So there's the priority setting. I mean, what matters to you? Are there priorities from other sources, for example, from your institution? Now, just to give you an example, actually, COVID created a whole bunch of new priorities, new opportunities. So there was a whole spate of grant proposals that were written around different aspects of COVID, right? So priority setting is an important aspect. If you're working in partnership, this might generate new problem statements, which are quite different from what you would tackle as an individual researcher. So that's the reason a lot of funding agencies provide collaborative funding. Then it's very important to be aware of what has been done in the past, what knowledge is available in the field, and what are the gaps in our knowledge base. And that is then the rich ground on which you can define a research question addressing those gaps. And of course, what are the funding opportunities available? Because a lot of times this does drive what researchers aim for in terms of grant funding. Now, the team is really important. I know that you're all graduate students, and currently you might be working in a very focused manner on your own research projects. But increasingly, research is not a solitary endeavor. There are a lot of different stakeholders involved in research. So the team becomes really important. Yeah. So definitely the individual researcher is at the center of the team, but you could have collaborators. There could be collaborators from India or from overseas, interdisciplinary, across sectors, as I described earlier. You might have people from within your group who might be part of the team for specific reasons. So again, here, maybe I'll just take a little pause, and I would love to hear examples from all of you who are attending today about the kinds of groupings that you see on your projects. Are there any other colleagues I haven't mentioned? Would love to hear
Yes.
from all of you.
Anyone? Yes. Just share any thoughts, really.
Feel
Mohan, would
free.
you
I mean,
like to?
need
Yes.
not be perfect.
Yeah. Hello, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
With respect to collaborators, I think because I work in human immunology, so it's very much important to collaborate with clinical people, like people who are doctors who can give you samples that you can work on. So I think in that aspect, if you are a human immunology researcher, I feel uh, collaboration with clinical systems is very much necessary.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Thank you for saying that.
Anyone else? What about our environmental scientists? Any thoughts on collaboration? Because that's quite interesting, right? Because sometimes as you do field work, Niranjan, would you like to talk about it? Yeah.
Hello. So I'm a PhD student in environmental studies. So my main focus of study is on trees and the impact that communities have on forests in the Himalayas. So in that instance, we need both ecologists and sociologists or anthropologists alike to get to paint a more holistic picture on how the entire system functions. So even in my current the project that I'm doing, we have collaborators who have human geography or sociology as their backgrounds. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that's another great example. Yeah.
And since I'm always putting my students in a spot, I I have a genuine question. So I want to ask Arundhati, in math, is it
Mhm.
very much an individual quest, or do mathematicians also like to collaborate?
Occasion- Hello, am I audible? Occasionally, yes, but most of the papers are usually single author papers. Occasionally, there are like sub-discipline wide collaborations in math as well, like algebraists, geometers, and others.
It's a beautiful sentence, I think. Algebraists in collaboration with what? Geometers. No, what do you say? Geometers. I learned this today. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Savita, shall we move on?
Yes, let's move on. But I think that's an important takeaway that certain fields are inherently more collaborative than others, especially where it involves stakeholders from outside of what you would conventionally think of as research. But that's happening more and more in research today. Okay, now this is a completely different. I'm just taking a little diversion over here. Many of us read Enid Blyton stories when we were growing up, the Five Findouters, Secret Seven, and all of that. And this was one of the stories I really enjoyed as a child, The Children of the Cherry Tree Farm, written by Enid Blyton. Now, why have I got an Enid Blyton book here in a grant writing workshop?
You have actually been deeply appropriate because I keep talking about children's literature, in the class. So it's like one of our sub themes. So it's wonderful that we have
Okay.
this synchronicity. Go on.
So, Enid Blyton grew up in England, and so she is completely familiar with both with the dreary city of London and the beautiful British countryside, and that really is the theme of a lot of her stories. So she had that contextual information, and that really provided the framework for a lot of her stories, right? The other thing was that her writing was always very lucid and evocative. When I was reading Cherry Tree Farm, I mean, there's a description. So I was growing up in India at the time. I had no idea what England was like. And there was all of these descriptions about homemade marmalade. And I just thought this must be like the most wonderful thing on the planet, because somehow the storybook made it sound that way, right? So it was really evocative storytelling. I couldn't put the book down. And the third point, really important, was that she was writing children's storybooks. And so many of her stories, especially Cherry Tree Farm, is from a child's perspective. So she really thought about her audience and she wrote accordingly, right? So I think these are some great lessons we can take from us, from here, in the context of any kind of storytelling, including grant writing. So you need that contextual information that can come from preliminary studies, it can come from literature searches and all of that. You need persuasive storytelling, and we'll see the reason for that very shortly. And you have to really understand your audience. Who's the audience? Who's going to read it? And therefore, really tailor your writing accordingly. So these are just some takeaways. I'm sure there are other thoughts as well. Depriya will have her own views on this as well. I'll move
Absolutely.
forward. Yeah, we'll come back to this later if we like. So come to what is called the project narrative. Now, this is really the meat of the grant, right? Kind of the ask, as it were. What is it that we want from the funding agencies? What are we offering? So you often see the term aim. So here the question is, what is the vision? What are we focused on? I mean, what is it that you would like to do? There's a history, which is what is the previous knowledge about this area, what has been done in the past, what worked and what didn't work. I think the what didn't work is very interesting for the research process. The specific intervention, which is what does the team propose to address, and objectives. Now, what is the difference between aims and objectives? You just think of the objectives as sort of tractable pieces of work, which are sort of individual pieces, but which together add up to answer the larger question. So the objectives support that aim. And think about the impact. I mean, how does this body of work further knowledge and inspire action? Because that, again, is the research process, that we're creating new knowledge and we're opening up new vistas. So what is that impact likely to be? Let's just, and now I'll come to this again, which is that all the people who review the proposals are reading a lot of proposals all the time, and they're usually tired and overworked. So whatever we write, then in that Enid Blyton-esque way, it has to be very compelling storytelling. It has to be easy and clear for them to understand. It's not sufficient for it all to be in one's mind. What is put down in writing for the reviewers and agency staff and committee members to read needs to be very, very easy to understand. So typically all funding applications ask for a grant title, and I would say maybe about 10 words conveying the key points and pointing to the outcomes. Many agencies ask for an abstract, and now the abstract should be a clear summary of what this project sets out to do. Sometimes this is requested as a layperson summary, which agencies share on their websites. And, so it's quite important to have the abstract written in fact, the abstract is the hardest part of the grant application to write, in my opinion. It's very few words, but it has to be succinct, and it should not give away any confidential information. And again, the grant proposal form will typically ask you, there'll be a section for background information. This is the history. This is what is known nationally and internationally. What are the observations in the field? What are the gaps in the field? And it's really important to present a balanced over here, because that demonstrates you through a lot of different strands of evidence.
It's a little bit of disturbance. Savita?
Synthesize this and project it in a balanced.
Savita, there's a
Okay,
little
can
bit
you
of...
hear me now?
Yes, I think
Hello?
it's clear now. Will you
Okay,
just... Yeah, it's perfectly clear now. Will you just go over the last bit again?
sure. So the background information, I think it's really important to present a balanced view, which just reflects one's maturity as a researcher. And it's really important that what is presented in the grant proposal is your idea. It's not somebody else's idea. Obviously, it needs to avoid any form of plagiarism. And each agency issues a whole bunch of guidelines, and we can talk about this in detail later on. And so it's really important to follow those guidelines. And as I've mentioned, keep the reader in mind, have an easy, lucid flow for your writing. And one little tip for the writing is that maybe if you have a bit of time, write one draft of it, put it away, go away, and come back to it after a few days. Then you'll read it in a slightly different light, because there's a lot of writing to be done. So in terms of the aims, what are the key questions being addressed? And of course, the objectives. They're well-defined pillars that help to break down the bigger problem. Can we have measurable objectives? Because that makes it easier to assess how we're going with things. And the objectives have to connect to the overall project timelines. The work plan, now this is where really it's the deep end of the detail in terms of what are the methods. Do we have the expertise needed to carry out all of those kinds of research? Have we done any kind of feasibility studies ahead of time? What if this approach doesn't work? Do we need a plan B for it? So all of that is rolled into what's called the work plan. And the final aspect of it is the timelines, which is how will the project be executed over time? So maybe you're putting in a pitch for a project over 3 years. So how do you see the different objectives being spread out over those 3 years? Is there a logical sequence to how those objectives are spaced out? And this is a very important exercise. It's also a very helpful exercise to do. And yeah, this is a visual representation of the timelines. It's called a Gantt chart. Many agencies will request a Gantt chart. And I think it's a really useful exercise to do because, as you're writing the proposal, as you're putting this Gantt chart together, it just helps to visualize very clearly and you sort of identify any gaps in your strategy, right? Now, the budget is a very, very important part of the project. This is the whole purpose of writing the grant, and resources are critical for implementation. So here again, there's a bit of homework that needs to be done. Understand the agency's policies. There are what are called allowed costs and disallowed costs. Understand them and create a budget that's based on your needs and on these policies. It's really important. And all the relevant categories. So we discussed a couple of them: personnel, consumables, travel. There are a couple of other costs we have not discussed so far. One is called institutional overheads. Some of you may have heard the term institutional overheads. It's what the institution needs to administer your grant, and there's usually a formula for that. Your research office can help you with that. Sometimes there are what are called access costs. So, for example, if there is an international resource you need to access for your research, but there's a subscription for that. So that's an access cost, but you can request that on the grant. And each institution has certain costing norms. So, for example, for salaries, for equipment. So best to check with either your finance staff or your grants office if you've got a grants office, and I know Ashoka does. And then it's really important to present the budget in the correct format, because each agency has a slightly different format for the budget. So there is a lot of detail that you need to go through, and maths. It's best to work with Excel spreadsheets while creating the budget. And the last point I've put down over here, this is really, really important, and this is where it's hard. But the budget is being created to facilitate the implementation. And, so you're articulating the work plan in a particular way, you're articulating the budget in a particular way. And you need to be able to step back and just make sure that what you requested for the budget is commensurate with what you're saying you will do as your work plan. And sometimes when you're in the throes of writing and you have a deadline looming large, it's very hard to see the gaps in your own arguments. So there it's helpful to get somebody else to read it, maybe ask a friend, a colleague to read it. Or as I said, you can just incubate it for a while, come back in a bit, and then read it once again, and you'll see the gaps. But the final version of the grant that is sent out to the funding agency should be what is called internally consistent, which means that each of the parts needs to be completely aligned. And that's quite a challenge, I can assure you that. And factor in plenty of time. So the deadline is always a challenge, and we all work best towards the end of the deadline. Just maybe 30 hours before the deadline, we all wake up. But that's not a good plan for writing a grant proposal. CV is a very important part of the application package, particularly for fellowships, because this is a way of conveying the track record of all the team members, and many agencies have their own version of a CV format. So work with that format, because it will allow them to capture the information that they're looking for about all of the team members. Letters of support. So sometimes if you're working with collaborators, you might need a letter from the collaborator confirming their participation, their roles, what they're willing to put into the project if it's successful, what are the arrangements for IP if that were to happen, are there any formal agreements required? So you might need those kinds of documents to support your own grant application. And from the host institution, certainly you will need sign off or a letter endorsing the project. Maybe it's a letter from the vice chancellor of the university. It could be a letter from the director of research. So each institution has it set up a bit differently. But in effect, the letter of support from the host institution confirms that if the project is successful, then you have full support in terms of space and other resources to carry it out. Yeah. Again, factor in plenty of time to collect all of these letters of support, because they're all part of the application package. Now, here I've used a lot of origami animals as the artwork here. Reason being that there are a lot of personas, lots of people, lots of colleagues you might need to talk to. You might need to have various things lined up while you're preparing to submit. And again, it's not a trivial amount of work. So you can help yourself by doing prep work. Familiarize yourself with all the package requirements. Just check whether your institution is eligible. If there's an online submission portal, you might need to register with them. You might need to ensure that the institution's registered with them. So there are all of these kind of background steps involved. And thankfully, nowadays, most funding agencies work through online portals. A couple of decades ago, this was ghastly because it was all paper-based, which meant that we had to create the grant proposal. It could be a 100-page document and then make 20 copies of that. And thankfully, that's not the case anymore. But so working with online portals for submission, again, there are a whole bunch of steps. And you can take help from your RDO. They might provide the right kind of assistance for you with these kinds of matters. Factor in time, obviously, if you're doing all of this prep work. And now finally, I'll bring it to the finish line. So you've gone through this entire process of ideating, of getting your team together and putting the narrative together, putting the budget together, getting all of the other documents together. So now there's the actual submission. So the first point on the slide is internal approval. Many institutions will require a certain internal approval. The research office will usually check through everything and authorize submission. So that must be done via the appropriate mechanism. The application package, as I said, there are lots of bits and pieces. So just make sure that everything is all in place. Double check that you're all sorted, you're set. And once the grant is submitted, you will receive an electronic acknowledgement of the submission, but following all of these steps carefully, keeping backup copies is always a good idea. And some agencies receive your grant application and then immediately request you to make certain changes before it will get taken for further processing. So if that happens, then just working the way the funding agency asked you to do. Now, this is it's a visual depiction of the steps that I just mentioned, and I thought this was quite helpful. So I think this is quite a nice way of following it through, which is the first step is obviously identifying the funding opportunity, downloading it, reading it, understanding the funding guidelines that have been issued over there. And then you start working on your draft narrative. You bring people together, get their inputs as needed, work on your budget, and all of the supporting documents. As I said, you start putting that together. All this while you continue writing, you might sort of leave it to breathe for a while, you might come back and look at it. But one big suggestion I have, this is a really good thing to do, which is to have a couple of trusted friends or colleagues to whom you can pass your grant application and ask them to just read it for clarity. There are those whom you would ask for their input on to the technical content. That is a different matter, but sometimes you just need a neutral view on clarity. Does everything make sense in your grant application? And that's a really good thing to do. And finally, review and submit your grant. And I'm just going to stop again a little bit. I've spoken quite a lot now. There are a lot of steps, but I'll leave this slide on and open to taking any questions from our attendees about any of what's being discussed.
While we wait for hands to show up, Savita, if I may ask a quick question.
Yes, please.
And so, when we go back to the idea of storytelling and the fact that, the person reviewing the grant applications probably has a stack of grant applications and they've also woken up 30 hours before their deadline, right? So they also have all these applications to review and select a few, right? So one of the things that I would like to ask is, in general, what is the level of expertise we are taking for granted while writing this, right? So let's say when someone is writing an academic paper, they know who they are writing for. Or if they are writing, let's say, a popular science article, they know who they are writing that for as well. But who do we target? Because it's uh, a lot of experts are involved, but perhaps the person reading it who would want the story more or would respond to the story more than to some of the other things. I don't know. Want to hear from you on this.
Sure. I think that's a great question. So I would say that overall for a grant proposal, the audience is a lot smaller than for a scientific paper or a popular story. And that audience you can imagine in four groups. One is the general external audience if you're putting out a layperson summary, which goes on the agency's website. That is a completely different thing. So let's leave that aside. Now, when the grant is submitted to the funding agency, it's first subjected to a lot of in-house checks by the agency staff. They are not really reading the narrative that deeply. They're looking much more at is the application package complete? Is it complete in all its administrative aspects? Are there any concerns to flag up? So those are the kinds of in-house checks that happen through the staff. And then it typically goes to peer reviewers. In fact, I've got that on the next slide. Let me just put that up. So the expert peer reviewers, these are people, Depriya, who are really closely aware of that field, be aware,
Right.
and they provide their input. So I think that is the first major scientific target audience over there, scientific research audience. It then goes to a selection committee who are working for the funding agency. The selection committee may or may not have experts who are completely familiar with all aspects of the research presented, but they will have a bigger picture view of things. So I would say that these are the two key technically literate groups who are the target audience. And of course, the agency staff do read the narrative, but as I said, their focus is much more on the internal consistency and on flagging up concerns. So when we talk about the storytelling, I think it's really important that the storytelling is appropriate for the peer reviewers and the selection committee. So I think that's a great question. And if you want to call it storytelling, I mean, or you just sort of just explaining yourself properly. I mean, when you talk about storytelling, then is it in a logical sequence? Is it easy to understand? Is it easy to follow what the applicant team wants to do? So that is a typical grant. Now, you might be in other situations where, for example, you're bidding for, I don't know, venture capital funding. And there the storytelling is even more important. Right. So I think in a nutshell, to answer your question, it also depends on what agency the grant is being submitted to and what is the review process at the agency. So it's really important to understand that review process as well. And in fact, just kind of going a bit forward, generally speaking, what do funders look for? So there's an assessment of the person or the team because they want the confidence that this individual has the right skill set to deliver on whatever they're proposing to do. The second point is the project, which is what is the gap? What is the unique advantage of this particular approach? What is your method? Is it feasible? All of these questions fall under the assessment of the project. The place features as well over there, which is this an institution that has a track record of supporting this kind of work? Are they likely to be able to do this? Do they have the right networks? Do they have the right financial management systems? All of that comes under consideration.
Savita, we are losing you again a little bit.
So coming back to the question, Depriya, the storytelling. Oh,
No, now it's better.
no.
Now it's
Hello?
better again.
So sorry, it seems to be a bit patchy today. Many funders nowadays have a section on impact. What is the potential impact of this project? And there's impact on the academic community, but there's also societal impact. And several funders, especially the international funders, need this kind of an impact statement. And the storytelling is really, really important in this impact section. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. And while we are asking questions, let's also not forget that we have a few people online. So
Okay, yes.
so in case someone online would also like to ask a question, do raise your hand. We have Shoradip here kind of monitoring that. So if you have a question, do raise your hand. Bidisha has a question.
Hello. So my question is, you just said that the first point here that they want to see if the person is capable of pulling off that project or whatever. Now, if a PhD student is writing a grant, on what basis? I mean, what exactly are the parameters that will decide whether he or she is enough capable of? Is it the number of published papers, or I mean,
Yeah.
what do they exactly look at in the CV? Yeah.
I think this is a great question. So maybe I'm just going to okay, we'll take this both ways. So grant writing is an essential step of any kind of research career. Move ahead to the slide. You can just take a look at the slide. So at the bottom of the pyramid, I've put down graduate students. Typically, graduate students raise funds to travel to meetings, maybe for field studies, might apply for small grants. Postdoctoral researchers might also be applying for their fellowships in addition to small grants and travel to conferences. And then for independent researchers who are running their own groups and research programs, there is a much, much larger swath of grant funding that is covered. So that includes their own fellowships, which is absolutely possible, research grants, infrastructure grants, sector grants, there's all kinds, right? So the reason I've kind of drawn it as a pyramid is because this is just to give you an indication that at all stages of a research career, there is some amount of grant writing involved, but that the specific schemes that you're applying for would be different. So, for example, the graduate students are unlikely to be applying for a large center proposal, right? But you're much more likely to be applying for, say, a small grant for a small piece of work, where the committee will factor in that it is this stage of career, hence the expectations are different from a later stage of career. Even for independent researchers, many agencies have some kind of uh, a system of saying, well, these are early researchers if they have up to so many years of experience. These are intermediate stage researchers, or these are more senior researchers. So there are ways for the committee to assess this person's potential and track record, which really differs based on your career stage. So that is the answer. But we can chat about this in more detail if you like.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll take one online question and
And
then we'll come to you, KP.
Sure. I think Megha had a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi. So I had a question regarding the budget. For example, many times we are in the initial stage of the project and time the budget accordingly, and that could be the, let's say, upper bound for any grant. But during the middle of the research, our maybe necessity changes, or depending on the results, the budget might vary or change. So, what should one do in those circumstances?
Great question. I think that's a really good question. So, firstly, the budget is some sort of a projection that if all goes well, this is what I want to do, and therefore these are the funds I need, right? And this again, some of it comes with experience. Typically, how much should I budget for consumables for a year for one person? How much should I budget for this? So those kinds of considerations, some of it comes through experience. Some of it comes through talking to colleagues, say at your RDO, that what do you think would be a reasonable level for me to put down? So that's kind of how the budget is constructed. Also, the funding agency has specific guidelines. You try and follow that. But what you said is absolutely right, which is that things may not go to plan. In which case, you need to change, your strategy, and therefore your costs would change. Now, some agencies are perfectly fine. They're with being flexible. So as long as you drop them an email saying, I know I had budgeted for X, but I'm having to change the work plan, and therefore now I propose to use the funds in a different manner. As long as that's reasonable, the funding agency will allow you to do that. Some funding agencies are more rigid than that. And they sort of say that, no, you can only spend it for what has been allowed. And so if you're not spending that, you'll have to return the funds, which is quite a hard thing to do for the investigator, right? So again, this all contributes. So managing the project is a whole different endeavor. And again, that comes with experience. Another thing that some investigators might do is that they might have different sources of funding. So if they have to change their strategy on something, they might deploy resources differently across their different funded programs. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Krishna Priya? Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. One thing that I constantly struggle with is that whenever I've put in any applications and it got rejected, I've never really gotten any feedback. Even when I ask for it actively, this has been the case for the smaller grants as well. So, how do I actually improve if I don't know what went wrong?
I think that's absolutely valid, and this is a problem we see in India all the time, unfortunately. So some agencies provide comprehensive feedback, but there are very few in India at the moment. Um, Unfortunately, we don't seem to have this culture of um, providing feedback from either the peer review or the committees. So I appreciate that this is very, very tough. Now, one way institutions can help is that before early career researchers send out their grants, maybe there can be like an institutional committee that looks at the content and gives feedback. So that's constructive feedback for the early career researcher. But I know that's not the same as getting feedback from the agency and therefore learning how to correct it for the next round. So it is a problem. I agree, it's a problem.
So I think this is actually great because this also gives us or demonstrates to us a gap where perhaps a more focused workshop or panel or something we could organize, because what we do, that is writing pedagogy, centers precisely on this on this principle that writing is improved when you get useful feedback, right? So our discipline kind of works around this, and there's been a lot of research showing how feedback then goes on to create a very different kind of writer, right? So let's see, Savita, this is something that then offline we will discuss and see if we can do something where we look at a rejected proposal and
Mhm.
we look for someone who can actually give active feedback to that specifically, because in
Sure.
that, from that exercise we can learn so much.
Sure.
Maybe
So
it can
I'll
be.
give you as an example. So one of the previous institutions I worked with, we did it in slightly different order, which was that the feedback happened before the grant was submitted. And
Right.
we saw a clear increase in the success rates.
Right.
So that's like an alternative approach.
Right. And much sort of less hard on the poor research scholar who's put in so much effort, and so it's slightly kind of softer landing. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Uh,
All
there's,
right.
Pradeep, there's another question.
Yeah, sure.
there's one question online. Shrigori, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I'll go ahead. Thank you so much for the talk. I just have like a one general question. When I was noting down the contents, like if you're writing a grant proposal, one is the what do they look for when they're selecting? One is like, is it like the project idea, that is the novelty in the work, or like the feasibility? Could it be done within a timeline, not too long or not too short of a time, or the money that we are proposing for? If these three factors are there, like what would take like more weight? What should I pay attention to?
Okay, so I will just share with you that uh, money, any funding committee, I mean, whether it's so agency, so any committee working on behalf of the agency, money is not limitless. So there are constraints on how much funds can be released. So there is always a certain level of assessment which is done as to just the merits of the proposal, but then it's a competitive process. So that means at the end of the discussion, there will also be this consideration of how does this proposal compare with the others in the cohort. So if there are other proposals within the cohort, for example, that are, have a great team, what they're planning to do is absolutely fantastic. It will shift the way we view things. It's great value for money. And, they're going to be carrying out this piece of work at an institution that already has a track record, XYZ. So then that proposal is a little bit more credible. But so it comes down to the budget and to how much the funding agency can support. And it is really a combination of different factors. I wouldn't say that it is any single factor, but these are some of the different factors that come into play during the decision-making process. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, let's go ahead then to the last section of my talk. These are some of the common errors or pitfalls of writing grant proposals. One is the failure to understand priorities. Now, as I said, each funding agency has a mandate. They create schemes for a specific reason, and so each scheme has specific priorities. So it's really important to try and get information about the funder and the scheme. So that's as far as the funding agency is concerned. But then there is also the institutional priority. Sometimes there's a variance between what the researcher wants to do and what the institution is willing to support. So there are these two different points of view to balance, and sometimes that is reflected in the writing. Now, the second point is more easy to understand, which is application guidelines. So usually funding agencies will release all of the guidelines. Some of these are more detailed than others. Also, some agencies are very hands-on. So you can actually send them an email saying, I just wanted to check something with you. I wanted to understand this better. They're more responsive than others. But there's a reason why those guidelines are issued, and it's really well worth adhering to those guidelines. A very common one is the word limit. So there might be some schemes where the word limit is 1,000 words, might be other schemes where it's 5,000 words. There is no point in putting a 5,000 word proposal for the scheme which has 1,000 word limit. So it's really important to adhere to these. And why is this important? It's because the funding agency is receiving a whole stack of proposals, and yours is one in competition with all of the others that have been received. So this following the application guidelines, firstly, ensures that you're adhering to what the funders are expecting. And secondly, you're playing along with, the rules for that competition. Now, the third point is the poorly constructed narrative. There are so many ways of writing the narrative persuasively with internal consistency and all. And that internal consistency that I talked about, it's easy to slip on that. It's easy to miss that. So it's really important to have your narrative solid, get feedback if you must, and that's usually incredibly helpful. The track record of the team, again, very important. So you may not have all of the expertise needed to carry out the work. So maybe a way to do that is to collaborate with someone. And if the funding scheme allows for the collaboration, you should get that collaborator on board. But A plus B plus C, all of the collaborators together should give the funding agency the confidence that this team can take on this piece of work. Yeah. And the final point I put down there is ethical considerations. Again, there are certain disciplines of research where ethics plays a big role, and institutions have their ethical human ethics committees. So having all of that in place is important. Making sure that your proposal has ethical approval is important. And if that's not in place, it will show in your application. And again, that could be a cause for concern. And this I've already mentioned that you can use funding to build your career, that at different stages of your career, you're likely to tap into different sources of funding. And now I come to a slightly sensitive point, but I don't think there is a need to be sensitive about it. Because in India, we have so many languages. Namaskara, aapne keman achen, mithika hai, tame baponu bhojan karyu. Just a sprinkling of the languages we have here in India. But unfortunately, English is the main language for peer communication and research. And so if English is not your first language, it might be a little bit challenging to write and speak persuasively, whether it's for grant writing or for dissemination of research outputs. So there are various things one can do. I would suggest that the nicest way to do this is to create a WhatsApp group with friends and share little English speaking and writing challenges with each other, share your samples with each other, and get friendly feedback. Maybe what Depriya was saying was a different level of feedback, but this kind of feedback can also be done amongst friends and more for English as the language. But Depriya, I'm sure you'll have more thoughts on this, but I thought I'd just mention this in my talk.
No, thank you. I'm glad you actually mentioned this because, because one of the things we don't want our young people to carry is the extra burden, right? This is not your mother tongue. You don't have to be, you don't have to carry the burden that you're not using it perfectly. You can do what you can, take all the help that you have, and get there by and by, right? Questions, thoughts? Anyone? Anything you would like to share? Savita, do you want to share the story of a grant application?
I'll do that. Just one last point I want to talk about. So I mentioned, so I was speaking to another group of students and we were discussing the English language challenges. And one of the students kind of said that, well, if we've done our work honestly, then it won't be difficult to explain and it won't be difficult to take feedback, right? So this brings me to this point of research integrity, which as graduate students, I'm sure you're all getting trained on. I'm sure there's a lot of sensitization about this at Ashoka. But this is really important in all scientific communications. So I would say this is something you need to bear in mind. And with that, I think I'll bring this part of my talk to a close. And Depriya, I think I'll just share the task with all the attendees and we can chat later as well, if that's all right.
I think I was going to suggest that
Yeah.
share the task
Yeah.
and and then maybe they'll have more questions also, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Okay, so the picture here is actually of a mobile van from Ashoka. I don't know how many of you have seen this or are aware of this van. But the idea was that this is a food truck that's now been customized and turned into a mobile sequencing van. It can go anywhere in the country and conduct next generation sequencing on the spot. So just this is a scenario. Please just think about it. That we all we are used to the kind of healthcare systems that are prevalent in the larger cities of India, but there are completely different and enormous healthcare challenges in the interior regions of the country. So this is the challenge that um, Savita as a funding agency is setting of our attendees. They will help you organize yourselves into teams. So it's completely up to you. You can pick a challenge that you want to solve, a healthcare challenge somewhere in the interior of the country. You can make use of the van. It need not be for sequencing, but it could take some other technology into the interior. So what we would like you to do is to work together as small teams and put together 5 slides. So a little 5-minute presentation from each of the teams. What is the challenge you're trying to address? Who are your team? What would you like to do? Do you plan to use the mobile van in any way? If so, what do you want to do with that? What is your budget? What are your timelines? And what do you think the potential impact of this work is likely to be? Okay, so this is the challenge. Depriya, I mean, yeah, just over to you in case you
Yeah.
wanted to add to that.
No, I think this is great. In the interest of time, do we say 3 to 5 slides and they can decide?
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah?
Absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now how do we divide you into teams? I think all the online cohort can be one team. We can send them into 3 people. We can send them into a Zoom, a breakout room. Oh, which is that's the whole, yeah. Okay. Meanwhile, yes, team, how many? Oh God, I'll have to do some heavy duty math now. Unless, yeah, or just sort of yeah, depending on where everyone is. KP, please, why don't you?
I was just saying maybe we can work with the benches.
Then this has already 4, then he can join the 3 of us. Is it? Oh, no, so he's there. So that is. Some branch. So then 1, 2, 3, 4. Seems like a large team. Isha, you want to go to this team?
Okay. Okay. So go there and Shoradeep can wander around where he wants. Yeah. Okay. We've got the teams.
So shall we
Yes.
say 3:30 for the teams to work together?
Yes, yes, I think that's fine. I think that'll be enough for the big story. Savita, can you pin the slide?
Will do, yeah.
Yeah. And then how do we, yeah, okay. So let these be the teams, and Choradeep and Shivam and I can figure out the technicalities. Okay. So this is team 1, team 2. Vidisha, you're going there? Or you're going? There are 4. That's right. Yeah. Aditya is part of your team. Shiva? Shiva? Yes, I think this is fine. Yeah, Shiva, why don't you join Aditya? No, that's all right. One of you can also join the online team. Yeah? No, I think not. I think, yeah, which team? I'm giving you the choice. You join whichever team you want to join. Ritika called you so lovingly. Go over there. And it's nice because we'll have a physics, chemistry, biology team, math, physics, chemistry, biology, math. So this is, yeah, this is like this is the full package. And maybe the rest of y'all can bid for Shorodip, and we'll see who is willing to, I don't know, do the most. Okay, so we've got 4 teams here, and we've got 1 team online, right? All right. Savita, you might want to take a little break and go and get some water.
I'll just do that. Yeah. And if there are any questions from the teams, please feel free to ask them right now before
Yeah,
you
any
get started
questions?
about the task, about the challenge. And, it's a purely fictional grant you're writing. So be creative, have fun is
Yeah.
what I'd say.
Be creative, have fun. I think have a little bit of fun. Yes, Satyam.
But it's going to be credible
You
as
can.
well, right?
Satyam has a question.
Is it
Yeah.
Yes.
mandate to use a mobile van? Can we use some other transport, something else?
Absolutely, absolutely. My question is, would you need to use a mobile one? If
Check,
so, then what would you want to do with it?
check.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
And of course, they know what I would use the van for. It would be a mobile library and a teacher doing read
Oh,
alouds. All right. Okay.
lovely. Awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll see you all at
Yeah.
3:30 then.
3:30, 3:30,
Sounds
and 3 to 5 slides. Okay. We'll
yes.
figure out the how they'll share it. Okay. All
Sure.
right.
All right.
Okay. See you in a bit.
Okay.
Join right now. Okay, so which just decide one of you, okay, one of you who will be sharing the slides. Yeah, so just join the Zoom link so that we can make them compost. This be easy. So one of you, so Arsha from team 1, which of you, just one of you join. Bishudit. All right, so Arsha, Bishudit, just decide who will join the Zoom link to present. Yeah, tell me who. Will it be KP? I know. I was also going to say that. Okay. Which of you will join? Which of you will present on behalf of the group, and we'll make you co-host. Just join the Zoom. Mohan.
Hello. Yeah, check. Hello, Professor. I'll just be checking my screen sharing because we'll be presenting. So just, yes, Professor is here. So I'll just check if I can share my screen or not. Doable, no? Oh, I was a co-host. I do. That's what I'm saying. So I think everyone would have because I'm not a special this thing, no? So I am also normal participant. So I think everyone would have. Yeah, yeah. All right, all right. So is my screen visible yet? No? Yeah, I'm sharing. Check, check, check.
Hi, Savita. Hi. Should we give them another 5 minutes?
Sure, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, guys, how are we doing on time? 5 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. They've really got into it, and it's lovely. It's lovely to see. We've ordered some coffee as well. I know I'm at the other end and you can't see me. Wait, I'll come and I'll wave my green flag. Hang
And
on.
I can't have the coffee there, so I'm going to have coffee here.
Yes, there I am. So they seem to be having fun. And so let's give them, I mean, I don't know, how are you placed? We've really eaten up your afternoon. You have enough time, right? We'll give them another 5 minutes. And yeah, thank you. No, I think now, come on, let's get ready. I think Dr. Ayyar has given us a lot of time. Yeah. So which two groups have already joined? Okay. So each group is now going to be known by their leading, by their, not their PI, I suppose. They're all equal in this. But so the band leader. Yeah, Shoradeep gives me the right word. So Arsha's team, Bishwajit's team, KP's team, and Mohan's team. All right. Yeah, which of you haven't joined yet? Just join so that we can also check that you have the sharing credentials. They're all saying 1 minute and 2 minutes, and they're really deeply into it. Savita, I want to say thank you so much. This was wonderfully, wonderfully useful. My
Oh,
colleague,
you're welcome.
yeah, my colleague Kritika tells me that she also joined in for most of it, and she enjoyed it very much too.
That's nice to hear. Yeah.
Okay. Once we see Dr. Iyer on the screen, that's the moment. Yeah. Okay, we now see Dr. Iyer on the screen, so that means it's time to begin. Who looks the most ready to go? Okay. We good to go? What about? Okay, I don't want to be killed by KP later, so that's why I'm kind of looking around to see if anyone else volunteers. Okay, Team Mohan is ready to go. So brilliant.
So I just quickly wanted to say that I mean this is a fictional challenge, but who knows, you might find yourself in a similar situation later on. So yeah, let's just hear what all the teams have put together. So please go ahead, first team. And what we'll do is, I mean, this is, you're sharing your ideas, and we'll open it up also to suggestions from your other friends who are in the room. So nothing to worry about, but let's see the presentations.
Right. Savita, you can see the team, right? Do you want one light this side? Would that help?
I can see the team, that's fine.
Okay.
But I can't see their screen just yet.
Okay, I think this is perhaps only one light, then it'll be like a spotlight. I think it's fine. You're able to share, right? Yeah, okay.
Great, and I can see the slide as well. Thank you.
All right, now rest of you, let's listen to Mohan and team present.
Am I audible? Yeah, okay. So what we are trying to do with this particular project is we're trying to survey on the persisting endemic diseases that happen that do we do see in rural areas in a state X, because we don't have any data to back it up, so we didn't want to name any state really, so we just like name the state X in India. It's not changing. So sorry, Dr. Savita, the slides were not moving, so we are just trying to fix it.
Even if you're just, if
Or else you can just like back, don't make it slides.
okay, rest
Okay.
of you.
So the challenge that we are trying to address in this particular project is one is the accessibility for this particular testing of so that we can know what particular diseases are being persisting in this particular population. And one is the processing time. If, for example, let's say we are trying to do the same thing in a particular hospital or something, the samples have to go there, then they have to be tested, then come back. So that's a whole lot of time. And in particularly doing so, we are trying to address problems to specific regions instead of a generalized idea about a particular country or a particular state. Now, why this particular thing is important? Because cities have generally good accessibility to healthcare and things are pretty much easier there. But when we compare it to rural areas, then the things go haywire. So that's the reason why we chose to address this particular problem. And the last thing is affordability. So we're trying to make it more affordable to the people of that particular state, to make it more easy to do the testing and get the results on the same day. Now, the team that we plan to include in this particular uh, van is one is physician, nurse, lab technician, a driver to take care of the van, and a local person who can be the point of contact so that it's easy to talk to and communicate to the local population. And the duration of this particular project we are planning to is for 1 year. Now the plan of action is, so to particularly address this particular problem, what we are trying to do, we are trying to equip our lab, so the mobile lab with uh, uh, equipment that can do blood testing and technician physician who can help in this particular interpretation of that results. And our vans will be equipped with laboratory services and to do regular blood tests. And what this particular thing will give us an idea about is what endemic diseases do persist in this particular population that we are trying to study. So that would, in a general, in a bigger picture, give us an idea what needs to be addressed in what areas, rather than generalizing the whole of the state. And the budget that we have planned is the salaries for the people associated, mobile van, then lab equipments for blood processing and testing, and there are miscellaneous uh, expenses as well. So all of that accounts to 1.8 crores. Now the potential impact would be so the survey would provide us an idea about the health status of the rural populations and what type of diseases do persist in these particular populations. In that way, we can address this in a larger scale, like um, so that things can get in control. Yeah, that's it from our side. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. I think that's a really great effort. So many thanks for sharing your proposal. And I just had a couple of comments and questions. So I like the fact that your grant title said it very neatly. It really spelled out what you want to do, which is the survey in a particular state. You've identified some of the challenges. So one of the questions I have, so you mentioned that you want to look at endemic diseases, and you've mentioned that you want to equip your van with some of the kits to do the testing for various diseases. So if you have some notion of what those diseases are likely to be, and therefore the kits that you need, have you got any baseline information from other kinds of sources? Are there any other sources of information, any surveys or any disease?
Yeah, like
Kind of.
yeah, if I may answer that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
diseases like tuberculosis, malaria are pretty
Okay.
much endemic to particular regions rather than being very much like throughout the state. Like there are some particular zones which are, I mean, where the disease do persist a lot rather than other areas.
Okay. So
So that is
you have some notion of the diseases. So what would have been good to see in the proposal is that these are some of the diseases we might be looking for, and therefore we will ensure that we have testing material for XYZ. But also a statement of why this needs to be done. So, I mean, like TB, malaria, and all, for example, there are other ways of gathering that information. What are the gaps in that? So, again, I know this is just a hypothetical situation, but you don't want to comment on that.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Dr. Savita, so we were trying to understand through this survey, we are trying to understand, get an overall picture of how is the health status of that community. And
Right,
from that,
right.
we can get a notion of analysis of what is a particular type of
Absolutely,
disease.
absolutely. So I'm just
That's the
saying,
reason we did
yeah.
not write any disease as such. So here
All
we
right.
wanted to get the health
Okay.
status more than a particular disease.
Right, but if it's so
Sure.
broad, then you'll always have sort of the reader at the other end. I mean, it's still very, very broad, right? So any sense of narrowing down, even if you say this is provisional or this is just to give an example, I think would a
Yeah.
bit of specificity would help.
But anyway, it's a good effort. So the other comment I have is the grant title mentions state X, but somewhere on the slide you mentioned country. So state X versus country, that's a very large extrapolation. And we didn't see the steps leading up to that. Yeah, so that's just a comment. The final thing is that all of this will require a lot of logistics support. You'll need some local partners. You mentioned having a local partner as part of your team, but a local partner from where? So again, one would have liked to have seen some details of that. But overall, I'd say wonderful attempt. Yeah, thank you so much. And
Thank you so much.
Devpriya, if you have any comments, and then I can also pass it on to the other teams if they want to add anything.
Yeah, nothing for me. Any of the other teams want to comment quickly? We can take one
Yeah.
peer comment on Team Mohan's presentation. Anyone? Anything really? Great effort and great to
Great
volunteer to
effort.
go first.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So one extra point, brownie point for that. Okay, shall we move on in the interest of time and then, yeah.
Professor.
Okay, Satyam has a comment. Yeah. you want to go next? Half a brownie point. There's some adorable mic grabbing happening over here, or mic fighting. This is Team Arsha.
Are we ready for Team Marsha?
They're just figuring out how to share the screen. Meanwhile, our coffee is here, Savita. I hope you managed to get some caffeine in as well.
Yes, I can see the slide. Wonderful.
Hello, hello.
Hi. So today our proposal is mostly revolving around maternal and child healthcare, and we are trying to take this maternal and child healthcare into the interior regions of India. This is a need which is very less explored, and uh, we see, especially in rural areas, there is many issues in childbirth. We see malnutrition in younger kids, and also there is no proper knowledge or facilities given to mothers in those rural areas. So we are trying to bridge that gap. So what our unique solution would be that will we will be making a van. We will have a van which will be equipped with basic instruments, for example, portable ultrasound, basic medicines that could be needed for maternal health care. For example, women lack in women lack in various medical needs and medicines. For example, basic things like folic acids, vitamin D, calcium, and all those things which are daily requirement of women during this period will be easily accessible in this van. And the idea is that generally in rural areas, though there could be either a budget to make one healthcare center, but what this van will do is basically, since it's a van, it can go to neighboring village. So for example, we could cover 2 to 3 villages in this van, and there will be timings where it will go at different timing of the day, and then it will hand over the various medicines which is needed timely for women to take during this time period. Also, various emergency instruments or machines would be there to check for emergency. For example, portable ultrasounds could be there to know um, various healthcare emergencies, etc. What timeline we are proposing is around 3 year for this particular project to start. 4 years, sorry. Um, the first year we will be mostly addressing this research and development and team building. Research and development would mostly go in finalizing what are the basic medicines or healthcare facilities that should be present in that particular van. Also, one interesting thing that have has come up by our team members is that there will be a basic television on that van where women can see and where basic things, for example, how we know that many days basic yogas are important for women during that period. So videos like that, and what are the timings, what food they should take, what basic exercises they should perform will be shown. Those videos will be made and will be shown in the TV or charts. And so these all things will be part of research and development. And then the second year will mostly go into pilot survey. We'll see what are the rural areas which need these particular facilities, and then we'll try to connect them. We'll maybe try to connect with the head of the village or panchayat office, etc. And then the third year will mostly revolve around material procurement and final production. For example, we'll equip our vans if we need to make some changes to the van to make it more accessible. So we'll do that too. And the final year would go into the soft landing of our wonderful van into this rural areas. And we will also collect surveys, collect data of the how this van has come will be coming into picture, and how this van will actually benefit mothers in those areas. And the budget that we think would require for this particular uh, proposal will be, for example, there will be a van, basic van around 10 lakhs, and then there will be interiors that we might need, and medical equipments, and power backups, etc. And we think that the budget would go around 18 to 20 lakhs. And the team would include people like permanent driver, technicians, IT personnel, medical staff, which would include a nurse or two, etc. That's all. Thank you.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. So does that bring your presentation to a close?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's end.
Okay, so firstly, congratulations. I think it's a really good proposal. And I love your slides. How did you make the slides? With the animations and all of
Yeah,
that?
it's from a template. So we use a template on healthcare and just edited it.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So I think it's a great proposal. So here are my suggestions on how this proposal could just be made a little bit more impactful. So I think the first point I would like to make is about the team. Actually, this is the same comment for the previous presentation as well. It's fine to say that the team will include drivers, technicians, IT personnel, medical staff, but I think you also need to tell the funding agency who will take responsibility for the project. Yeah. So that is usually the principal investigator. So that kind of governance is very important as well. So in addition to the individuals who will do this kind of work, there's also the governance aspect. So who is leading the project? One would expect to see that under description of team. The second is if we go back to your timeline, can we look at that slide? The timeline? How? Awesome. So my suggestion would be to merge the activities in year 1 and 2, the R&D, team building, pilot surveys, social surveys, and all of that. But then in the fourth year, leave yourself some time for data analysis, impact measurement, and dissemination, right? Because this should not just be a standalone project. You're taking on this piece of work, you want to improve the health and lives of women, you should be able to share your data and insights as well. So, in all good projects, keep some time aside for that kind of analysis and dissemination of results. Yeah, so that's one adjustment I would make. The third point is measuring impact. Again, that's really important. How do you measure impact? So, are you going to look at the number of women who are helped? What is the reach of your program? What have the outcomes of the interventions been? So these are some of the questions that any funder would want to know. Also, once this program comes to an end, if you want to build further on it, you have to be able to go to the next funder and tell them, we did this. These were these were the outcomes from the program. So think a little bit about measuring impact. And again, throughout this timeline, the data management, that is something you can pay attention to as well. All right. So apart from that, really lovely project, well done. That's it from me. I don't know if
Thank you.
Devpriya and the others have any comments.
Yes, Shikhar.
If not, let's go ahead. Let's move on to the third team.
So his question is how we are going to plan this entire project in 20 lakhs, such a small budget. So the thing is, this is just a pilot thing, and we are just going to try out if that works. If that works, we are going to implement that in a larger scale, and then we can use the same model in different parts of the country, in different areas. So the R&D and team building, that first and second year will entirely go into this part. And if this thing comes along well, then we can implement this in a larger scale.
So if I can just add to that, actually, that is correct. What you should ideally have had is a year-wise budget and a consolidated budget. Now, if you want to present this as a pilot, I would not advise a 4-year pilot. I would say let's have a 12-month pilot. And what do you want to do during those 12 months? So think about that. Yeah. And then have the rest of the program, but have a consolidated budget that also has the year-wise kind of estimates. Now, the other aspect of the budget was that right now your budget only has budget for all the equipment, but you would need budget for other categories as well, like salaries, like logistics, miscellaneous costs, etc. Right? And think also about the data analysis and the dissemination. Would you need any costs for that? Would you need costs for generating, outreach material for your program? So there are different aspects to the budget over there, but overall good effort.
Thank you.
So who's going next?
Hello.
Yes.
How do I share? You're gonna stop sharing?
Savita, I hope you're enjoying.
Hello.
All right. We see some synchronicities in how these have been taught, and it's very nice. These are all very important areas. Okay.
I can start.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right. I think the previous team gave a very good overview as to why the particular project that we are going to be presenting on is a relevant issue. they did talk about India, how our region of current focus is rural Haryana. We're proposing this particular project for a mobile healthcare to address maternal and child healthcare in rural Haryana. Just give me a minute. The slides are not moving. Just give us a minute.
I was really terrified, Savita, about all the different moving parts of, of doing a hybrid talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's gone off
It's gone
very
off.
well.
Yes.
It would have been lovely to have you in person, but short of that, this has been, I think it's worked well.
It's worked well. Yes, it's my first hybrid session. It's, I think, astonishing as that sounds.
No,
I've
truly.
done,
Yeah.
I've done either online or in person, but this is my first hybrid session.
And let me tell you, hybrid